Mariah McTavish, landscape architect, Terra Alta Associates. Needing some fresh air, Mariah headed out into the courtyard, looking around for a quiet spot to sit down and give her feet a respite from the stiletto heels she was wearing. Mariah noticed James and Don X tucked away in a corner of the central plaza. Everyone here had taken to calling Enrique's father Don X, in a joke that started out as a reference to the X-Men, because he was the benefactor behind the Institute, just as Professor X had begun the school for mutant children. It had stuck. Plus, he was always offering his sage advice to the young professionals. As Mariah walked over to them, her landscape brain was analyzing the cutout in the rock wall with steel raised beds as the back and soft outdoor cushions. It made a public space feel more private. The smell of late-blooming winter daphne emanated from the planter and mixed in well with the crisp breeze off the mountaintops. Don X was a quiet and reserved gentleman. He had an incredibly stoic face and the same commanding presence Enrique had just showed inside. His hair and tightly trimmed beard were white with flecks of gray. His face had high cheekbones and a walnut-toned skin of the indigenous people mixed with the Spanish settlers. As her eyes took in the artistic observations, Don X noticed Mariah approaching. A giant, warm smile spread across his face. Over the last few years, he had adopted her into his family. Having no daughters, or daughters-in-law, yet, he doted on her. She was so often at his house for late-night meetings with Enrique and James, it had made them close. James stood up to give her a big hug. For a second, the tension left his features. Sitting next to his father, Mariah could easily see the resemblance in the facial planes. James had a much lighter olive skin tone and a lean frame that showed his fine bone mother's features. He was more at home in his computer lab than a crowd of people, however. Mariah knew he was also concerned about Carol, his mother, and his least favorite person on Earth. Carol's blue-blooded family expectations were for respectable sons. Enrique fit the bill, but James had disappointed her with his silly dreams and games. When James dropped out of school at the age of 15, he started his own tech company from the proceeds from his live streaming and alpha release of a survival game. She had disowned him and took him out of her will until he realized the error of his ways and became respectable again. "What a lovely evening," Mariah said. Then, in her encrypted chat, she motioned her hand and typed, "The tracking system is incredible. Are you watching how fast this event is trending?" Mariah loved the simple way that their rings tracked hand movements and use of sign language to write virtually. "I can't wait to analyze the data of which players seem to have the highest stats at the end of the evening," James typed back, saying out loud, "Yeah, a bit warm for this time of year." Don X, who refused to get plugged in, as he referred to it, cut off their unspoken conversation. "You did an incredible job of designing this plaza. You've really outdone yourself this time, mija." "Thank you, Don. It helps that I have the best craftsmen and an incredible technical team that helped me test the design before one stone was even placed." Looking over the plaza, the water feature uplit the groups of visitors. The clean, straight line of light drew her eye out over the valley. The guest cabin lights twinkled out from the forest, and the trolley could be seen ferrying people back out to their cars. The best part was how little light had been shed by the farmhouses out in the valley. Even knowing where to look, Mariah could not pinpoint her house in the rolling hillsides from here. Especially with the blinds down, no light escaped. Just then, Mariah heard Enrique coming up behind her. His light cologne intoxicates her. He stood close behind her, and she could feel the heat on the skin of her back. Buenas noches, papa. How are you enjoying the event? His deep voice came from right beside her, and it sent a shiver down Mariah's spine. And it was all she could do to keep from blushing bright red. Don X smiled at his son. Oh, you know, mijo. I'm just happy in my library reading a good novel. But it is a lovely event, and your speech came across very well. James was getting a little less comfortable. Now that Enrique was here, it meant Carol was unfettered to drop in. They had an unspoken rule to keep her away at all times. James got that look he did when running through a detailed program in augmented reality. All of a sudden, he jumped up and ran towards the lifts. Bye, he typed to Mariah. Well, this is about to get fun, Enrique said quietly in her ear. Don X's eyes had took on a hard edge, and Mariah knew Carol was approaching. Mariah gracefully stood up and turned to greet the Ice Queen, as the family called her. Carol had an aura of old money and years of etiquette and dance combined with years in the courtroom. She was a formidable woman, with layers of motives in every word. Politely kissing Mariah on either cheek, her tone was a notch above freezing. Hello, darling, you look marvelous this evening. Then she pretended to notice her ex-husband, and the air crackled with her hatred. Edgar. She nodded at Don X, imparting so much venom in one word. Mariah used her meditation training to not react and jump back from Carol. Pivoting around, Mariah steered Carol towards the fountain. Carol, have you had a chance to see our accommodations yet? It's our best suite of rooms with an incredible view of the valley. Carol's mask back on, she smiled politely at Mariah. As would be expected. My assistant has already taken my things up. I'm disappointed to see my youngest still refuses to grow up. At the last little barb, she saw a friend and walked off without even have an enjoyable evening. Mariah was used to dealing with Carol and her colleagues and didn't take it personally. Turning back around, she saw Don X and Enrique deep in conversation. Enrique had a calming hand on his father's shoulder, and Don X looked exhausted. She joined them both and softly kissed Don X on the cheek. I handled the witch, Mariah whispered in his ear. He smiled thinly, but she could see the light coming back into his eyes. We were just about to head home. Would you like to join us, Mariah? Enrique asked, looking over at Mariah in an obscure way. Since it's on the way, of course.